Hey all, Pixel here in Probable Garage, and we're going to be dealing with the gutter seam sealing on my Chevy G20 van. That roof looks a little weird because I did a larger two-part video on everything I'm doing to this roof. This is just the DIY on how to deal with the cracked seam sealer up here. So this is going to have pieces pulled out of that larger video, so it's going to jump around a little bit in that regard. I'm also going to film some stuff directly like this, talking about just that part in the ways that it differs from me doing the whole roof. So just so you're aware, this is just the DIY on how to deal with the seam sealer and gutter. If you want to watch those other videos and watch everything I went through, feel free to. I'd love the views, but this is cut out so you don't have to. So when I talk about the seam sealer failing, this is what I'm talking about. You can see the seam sealer's dried, shrunk, and cracked, and that's now a gap that water can get in. It's the only one right here. But then also, I don't know if this is part of the same thing or just its own thing, but I'm getting rust bubbling here too. More cracking up here. You can kind of see some spots where I touched it up, but it's still failing. So what I need to do is go in and literally grind all the seam sealer out with a wire wheel because it's hard as a rock. And then once I get that out, I have to deal with this rust. I also deal with any rust I find in there. That's all got to get treated and encapsulated or removed. And then once the rust is dealt with, I'm going to get epoxy primer in there. And then I'm going to fill this with seam sealer again. And you can see in this, there's this very low spot in the seam sealer. I'm going to eliminate that as best as possible, because I'm going to come in with self-leveling seam sealer and try and fill, if you look at the level of this, so that there isn't that high spot. So there's a very small amount of gutter relative to what there is now. All right, so I just went at it with a brass wire wheel on a drill. That was doing basically nothing. Just out of curiosity, I tried going at it with just a screwdriver and a hammer to see if I can get under it and peel it out. That didn't do anything. I had a twisted wire wheel on an angle grinder. This is working, but there's a lot of seam seal. That's already really deep. It's already much deeper than I thought it was. I thought there was going to be a very, relatively small amount. That channel is pretty thick and deep. So this is working. It's throwing a ton of crap all over the van, but whatever, I kind of expected that. But it's going to be super slow, this method. It's going to be like a bunch of passes over the same area to try and get it all out of there. So I'm going to experiment with heating it up with a heat gun and maybe even a small torch and see what happens. It's probably just going to make a horrible mess and stink, but it's worth a shot. So I just discovered something interesting that I want to show you. Let me grab a light here. So I would never have noticed this just using the wire wheel. If you look on this side is fresh metal. This side, 2/3 of the bottom and then up this side, that's rust and dirt. Now the important part is that this area looked like here. And what it is that this seam sealer is pulled away, even though it's not really visible, it's pulled away all the way along here. And there's a very tiny crack, and so the moisture is getting in there, getting under it, first off dragging the dirt down with it, and then second off rusting it. So that line, actually, now that I look at it, this is the roof skin that's rusty. This is the wall that is not rusty. So yeah. So that's proof right there that the seam sealers failed all along here, even though it didn't look like it had failed. So obviously it's going to be worse in other areas. Heating it kind of worked, and I was able to peel some out. This is going to be a miserable job. There's just no way around it. There's no version of this where this doesn't suck. But I am trying to find the most efficient way. So I'm going to get at it. All right, I just found a thing that may work really well. As you can see, I got a strip of it here. So here's my little snake here that I've made. I'm going to break that off. And then I had been trying to do this, and that was a twofold problem. One, it just wasn't working super well. And secondly, when I'd bring my hand in and try and pry or whatever, I just end up cooking my fingers. And then I had a brilliant idea. If I take this and do this, what I'm doing is heating the metal this is stuck to. So I'm not trying to heat through all of this seam sealer. What I'm doing instead is affecting where the seam sealer meets the body. And that seems to do a good job of helping it release. There you go. And then I just kind of work my way down. There we go. Look at that, look at that. And you can see by the fact that this has got this sort of gray color, that's the primer. So I'm fully getting this out of here. I'm not leaving, I mean, I'm leaving a little bit, obviously, it's not perfect, but it's fully releasing from the metal. And I'm just kind of walking it along. And I'm not working terribly hard now. Like, you can see, it's just kind of trucking along. And it seems like, as long as I don't get too greedy, move you a little bit more. As long as I don't get too greedy and sort of outrun heating this, it just keeps trucking along. I tried it without the heat gun, and this doesn't work without it. So this isn't just it peeling out. This is definitely the heat gun helping me get it to release. And like, this is still miserable, but oh my god, that's so much faster. So yeah, there's a little bit of residue down in there. Mostly it's what seems to have kind of gotten caught under the roof skin. But dear god, that's so fast by comparison. So what I should be able to do is go around, do it like this, and then come back again with a wire brush, wire wheel, something, and just get the last of that off. There also seems to be a little bit that's caught under the lip here. But yeah, that's the technique. Heat it up from underneath with a gun, get it to release. Obviously, it might be different on your van. This is still flexible. And I think that's part of why the wire brush sucks so much, is because all I'm doing is grinding away at it. If this is rock hard in your van, if this has got no flex whatsoever, like especially if it's in chunks, because I have seen vans where this is like, looks like it's cracked in multiple places, and you pry down and it's just like a hard chunk, then the wire brush is going to work better than this. But if yours still has some flex, even if it's shrunk, this is the technique.
3 days later.
All right, I'm done. All picked out. All the big stuff is now gone. This side is just as bad as I expected it to be. So now I need to get in there and clean all both the loose stuff out and whatever's stuck, and then go at the metal where it's rusty and get as much of that rust out of there as possible, and then treat what's in there. All right, got a ton done. From partway here all the way around to the beginning of the curve on the other side is all done. You can see how thoroughly that's been cleaned out. Spots like this where the rust came up and over has been ground down. They're going to need, all of this is going to need more, obviously, but this is basically the like, get the stuff out and get the loose rust out step. So all of this looking way, way better. Yeah. So what I did was, this is going to be hard to show you because of the lighting. Here, I can kind of show you over here. You can see the roof skin comes down, and then there's the edge of it. There was seam sealer that went up under that, and then this edge is folded over, and there's seam sealer that went up under that. So I took a knife and went like this to cut all the seam sealer free of whatever tiny bit is under here, and did my best to do the same thing in this dimension. That was a lot harder. And then I would take a screwdriver and pick that out. Anything that wouldn't come loose, like too big a chunk or something, got tacked in the next step, which was to take this style of twisted wire on the angle grinder. This could happen on a drill. I just have that for the angle grinder, and went in here and ground everything. That, as you can see, I went up to at least this ridge, and all these slightly darker spots you can see, those are all little bits of corrosion that were hiding under the paint. And that's the case all the way around. So each one of those was another rust spot starting to form. And then that would leave in basically that area where the seam sealer was stuck, largely unaccessed. So then I went back with this one, which is a brass one, but is not the twisted one, and that got in there better. I still, where the rust is really bad, and I don't think I have any good spots to show you, but there's a spot. You know, it didn't remove all the rust, but you can see it removed all the loose stuff and really polished it down. You know, and if you compare that to like this area, you can see the improvement. So I'm going to climb up on the roof. I'm going to work on that front edge because it's the only way I can do it. And then once I've got that to the same level, I'm going to take my phosphoric acid. OSPHO is one of the things it's called. It's also often referred to as like concrete cleaner / prep. Like concrete cleaner or concrete prep and metal prep. It's phosphoric acid, and that's going to get sprayed basically on every single bit of exposed metal all the way around. And then that's going to sit overnight and do its thing. Let's take a look. All right, well, it definitely did something. You can see that sort of darkness to the rust. A lot of that is the conversion. Let's see, what do we got over here? There was another rust spot over here somewhere. Somewhere around here there's one. Oh, there it is. Yeah. Phosphoric acid kind of worked. It didn't work as well as I would love it to. But realistically, I don't think a second application is going to really get me much. So I think at this point, I'm going to have to call that as treated as I can get it. The next thing is going to be to put some Master Series in there. I mean, as far as dealing with, yeah, see, like that treated it much better. That's much more converted. The next step with the channel is going to be putting Master Series paint in all these rusty areas to make sure that that's all sealed away. All right, working my way around the roof. What I'm doing is in here, I've got Master Series rust paint, and what I've been doing is very carefully, what I've been doing is going in and brushing it onto anywhere that there's any corrosion whatsoever, basically, in there, just to form a seal. And then in the areas where the corrosion climbed up and over, I'm doing the front. But I've gotten all the way around that side. I've come around, gotten a ways down here. The biggest thing that I'm trying to do with it is make sure anywhere where the corrosion got up to the, could have done better here. Anywhere where the corrosion got up to the inside lip of where this is folded over, I'm making sure I'm getting the paint up there. And I'm making sure I'm getting the paint in where this piece meets there to try and help seal all of that off. Just because if I can put a little bit of paint in there that then removes the gap there, even if the seam sealer fails, even if the paint fails, the seam sealer fails, and the epoxy primer fails, that's one more protection against water getting down in there. Water will instead sit in here, and yes, that'll still cause rust, but it'll cause rust in a very localized place very slowly, more slowly than if it gets down into the walls of the van. So I'll take that extra little bit of protection. Sorry for the compressor, but van's wrapped up, roof is wiped off. We're putting some paint on it and hoping for the best. All right, so as you saw, you need to get the old seam sealer out of here. You saw the method I used. If yours is completely dry, that method's probably not going to work super well, but you can experiment with it. It is definitely the easiest if you can get it to work. And it makes the least mess because you're not shredding every tiny bit of seam sealer into dust that gets thrown everywhere. You'll need to clean it out like you saw. The Master Series paint that I used there'll be links to everything that I use down below. A bunch of it will be Amazon affiliate links. I get a tiny kickback from Amazon. If you buy from Amazon via that link, even if you don't buy that exact product, but feel no obligation whatsoever. Buy it wherever you want, buy it wherever the price is best. Don't feel any obligation to do that for my sake. But you're going to need to seal in there. The Master Series paint that I used is not available through Amazon. It's only available in quart sizes. I was going to point you all to POR 15 because they sell little pint sizes, but a pint of POR 15 is not much cheaper than a quart of Master Series. The issue with the Master Series paint is it doesn't store super well. First off, once you open the can, you have to seal it with 2 layers of plastic wrap between the top and the lid, or it will fuse the lid on and it'll never come off again. But also, just being open in the moist air will cause it to start catalyzing. So what you want is to put some sort of rust reformer paint or something like that on. Other companies do sell rust reformer. Feel free to use that kind of thing. POR 15, if you have it, use that. Any of that kind of stuff. Or you can probably go right to the epoxy primer and you'll probably be fine. I use the Master Series just because I've been using it for years and all kinds of stuff, and by and large it has always served me well. It's not 100% a guarantee, but it's one of the great products out there for stopping rust. But either way, next up is you have to epoxy prime the channel. I epoxy primed my whole roof because I'm doing other stuff, but at the very least you have to get that channel epoxy primed. You can't just use automotive primer that they just sell. That stuff is porous. It will allow water to seep into it and therefore through it. It means if you have a failure, that's just a conduit for water. It's not any kind of protection. So what you want is a 2K epoxy primer. If you have the capability of spraying, you can easily buy it from any automotive supply place. Just come in and say, hey, I need an epoxy primer. They'll sell it to you. If you don't have the capability of it and you're doing this, you've got to do it with spray cans or something, you can buy epoxy primer in spray cans. There'll be, like I said, there'll be links, but you can just Google 2K epoxy primer. And the thing you want to look out for to know you've got the right stuff is, first off, it has to be called epoxy primer, not automotive primer, not sandable primer, not just primer, not bare metal primer. It has to be epoxy primer because that's the stuff that actually seals in everything. And then when you're looking at the spray can, there should be a big red button built into the lid. I'll put a picture here to kind of show you. That shows that it's a 2K product, because what you're going to do when you're going to be spraying is that button gets pulled out of the lid, stuck in the bottom of the can, and then you basically smack it in the butt. And that opens up a separate chamber inside the can and lets the two halves of the paint mix. You're then going to shake the absolute hell out of it. And then the can will tell you how long, but you've got a window where that can is sprayable before all that paint catalyzes and that can becomes junk. If you are just doing the gutter, I feel fairly confident that one spray can will probably be enough. It's probably not a bad idea to pick up a second one just to be 100% sure. And also because it can't hurt to have more coats in there. You literally can't, in any real meaningful way, put too much paint in. But you're going to, either way, whether spraying or whether you're using the cans, you need to get all the surfaces in here covered in paint. So the roof, the flat, and coming up, I want to make sure that's all well coated in paint. Hopefully the part I'm showing you on mine has that, because I can't actually see it right now. And then there's a window of recoat for that paint. Most of it, it's like there's what... I'm going to give you a little bit of paint information because this is relevant to doing this. Most paints have a flash time. Flash time is usually when you can start to put the next coat on. So you can either put wet on wet if you're using the same paint, which means you can spray an entire coat on the entire way all the way around. Then when you get back to the beginning, you can do it again. Because that's just, the paint will just adhere to itself. If you're going to pause between coats, you have to be, there's a recoat window where if you're less than a certain amount of time, you can just spray your next coat and it'll catalyze to it just fine. You'll treat it the same, even if it's not the exact same product. And then there's a recoat window, that's the flash time. There's a recoat window. Most paints, it's usually like 24, don't take me as a 30 on everything, but most paints like this, it's usually 24 hours if it's outside and subject to the sun, and 7 days if it's inside and not subject to the sun, because being out in the sun will speed up the catalyzing and hardening of the paint. So if you're within the right recoat window, you're not going to have to do any more sanding. So pay attention to this. I can't do that because I had to wait because my roof paint was delayed. So I'm going to have to do some scuffing and sanding, so you'll see the process if you have to do that. But if you watch those recoat windows, you should be able to paint it, wait enough time for the paint to cure, but not fully, harden. You should be able to do your seam sealing, and then you should be able to wait the time for the seam sealer to cure, which if you're using the 3M stuff like I have, it is a very short window before you're able to recoat. Like I think it's like 30 minutes and it's ready to be painted over. And then you can do your color coat over top of it. As far as your color coat goes, obviously if you've got the ability to spray and everything, you can go buy paint. If you don't have that ability, you can get custom mixed spray cans. Search for like automotive paint supplier in your area. You may find a place, and then for a lot of them you can bring in a piece of the van, unbolt your gas flap if it's the right color. Like if you don't have a van that's multi-colors, you can unbolt your gas flap, bring it into them. They'll be able to scan it and mix you up a spray can that exactly matches your paint color. That's probably your best bet. If you don't have a local place, you can use the paint code and you can get paint, but it won't necessarily be an exact match. There's also a thing between, depending on the era of your van, between single stage and clear coat, base coat. My van is a clear coat base coat from the 90s. I painted the bottom in single stage because it was not the final paint job, and it may not show perfectly in this light, but there's a color mismatch because single stage will never match clear coat base coat. If you're not super worried about it being a perfect match, single stage is easier because you just have to spray that. You don't have to put a clear coat over it. You can, but you don't have to. So if you just want your van to look decent, but you're not worried about it being all perfect, you can probably get your color done in a single stage spray can, and you can use that. If you can't get it in a single stage, you want it to look better, you can get it in a clear coat base coat paint in a spray can, and then also get a can of clear coat and do the 2 coats of it. But again, if you hit your recoat window and get all your seam sealer in, you can then, as soon as that seam sealer is dry, you can put your color coat over it and you're done. If you use 2-stage, you put your color coat over it, you wait for that reflash time, you put your clear coat over it, you're done. I'm putting this in the middle of the video just because this is the stage I'm at, but also I want you to have all this knowledge so you can kind of watch what I'm doing, but also plan your attack. A good place to, and I didn't do a perfect job because this van's getting repainted entirely, but if you had the rust that came up over the edge, there's a line here. This is actually more seam sealer here, but this stuff doesn't tend to fail because it is protected a little bit. If any of this has failed on your van, you don't want to use the self-leveling. You just want to use a different kind of... For that stuff, you want to use a regular seam sealer that you can just buy like in a tube. Because if you use the self-leveling there, it'll drool down the side of your van. Different horses for courses. But you can mask at that and then up and over, and there's a little ridge line here. That'd be a good place to mask. And when you're doing your painting, you want to make sure you get all the way up and around, all the way up and around. Again, my outside is imperfect, but that's because when I do the side of the van, I'm going to go up and over this edge anyway. So, because I missed my recoat window on the paint, what I'm going to do is, in that gutter, I am going to scuff the entire thing with a red scuff pad. You, again, get these from auto parts suppliers. I don't know where I have them. Anyway, they look like Scotch-Brite scrubbies, but they're a very specific grit. And the red ones are, I don't know what the grit is on them, but they're the ones you use for just prepping a paint for another coat to go on it. So I'm going to red scuffy all of in here, and around. And then my roof is going to get a combination of scuffed and sanded because there's some orange peel up here I want to deal with. Once I've got that scuffed, then I'm going to put my seam sealer in, and then I'm going to wait my recoat window for the seam sealer, and I am going to paint the roof or something like that. Your seam sealer can't just sit out. It is not UV stable long term, so you have to put paint over it. If you want to be hyper paranoid, you can epoxy prime, put in seam sealer, epoxy prime, color coat. But realistically, all that seam sealer needs is a layer of paint over it to block the UV rays. So it doesn't need to be sealed behind the epoxy primer to survive. It just needs to not be exposed to the light. So that's what the color coat over top of it will take care of. All right, it's about a week later. I had to wait for my roof paint to come in. So annoyingly, I've missed my recoat window. But what I'm going to do now is this through here, up the channel, and up a little bit is all going to get scuffed for my seam sealer. So I got that scuffed all the way around. As you can see, this is just, see how it's dull, has no shine to it really? That's what you want. All you need to do is break the surface. Because you're just putting little micro grooves in there for the next layer to stick to. So as long as it's not shiny, oh, I can show you now. This is what I used. Don't go in like the household section of the supermarket and grab a scrubby. They're not the right grit. You're going to want to go to preferably an auto paint supply, though they'll probably want to sell you an entire box. I think if you go to many auto parts stores and look in the paint section, you can buy a couple of these red scuffies, and they should be enough to do the whole thing, like one pack of 2 or something. And yeah, all you need to do is get that not shiny. I went all the way up here because I'm going to be going further. You just need to get wherever you put epoxy primer to be not shiny. And again, this is if you're outside that recoat window for the paint. If you're inside that recoat window, you do not need to do this because the paint hasn't fully catalyzed yet. So the next layer will be able to basically attach to that and they'll catalyze together. So again, you only need to scuff this if you're outside that recoat window. Now what I'm going to do next is I have a surface prep that I'm going to wipe everything down with. This is to get all the remaining dust out of there, any other contaminants, oil, grease from my fingers, stuff like that. If you're just doing this and this is all you're doing in your van, you don't need to buy an entire container of Prepsol. Acetone will work, though that's a little aggressive. Acetone's probably good for might be good for your first cleanup, but not once you put the epoxy on. I wouldn't risk it then. Might be fine, but I personally wouldn't risk it. Trying to think what's a safe thing to use for that. Honestly, a cheap window cleaner, like glass cleaner, the stuff that's just like pretty much ammonia and water, is probably going to be your best bet for a cheap alternative. You don't want streak-free shine. You don't want ammonia-free. You just want the cheap, go to the dollar store and buy the ammonia glass cleaner. Don't use straight ammonia. That's too strong. But yeah, all you're trying to do is, if I go in here right now, and I blew this out with the air gun, there's still a little bit of dust and stuff in there. And because I've had my fingers in there, there's grease from my fingies and oils from my fingies in there, and that'll just affect adhesion. And since the whole point of this is to get that damn stuff to stick, you don't want to skip this step. You want to clean in there really well. And then you want to make sure whatever you put in there has completely dried out of there. And then we're going to move on to the next step. Gutter is clean, ready to finally put seam sealer in. Now what are we using? We are using SEM self-leveling seam sealer. Everything I've seen anywhere from anyone who talks about doing this, this is what they say is the best stuff. Don't take me as an authority, but take me as the person who did a ton of research, and this is what everybody says to use. 2 reasons for this. Like the epoxy primer, because this is a 2-part, it'll catalyze and it'll harden. It's still flexible, but you know what I mean. It's gonna cure so, you know, exactly how it's supposed to. And because it's self-leveling, it'll flow out a little, which means you'll get a nice smooth finish in there. So what has to happen? These dual cartridges need to go in a special gun. This is that gun. I'll link to this stuff. If I recall from when I bought this a while ago, because I've been putting off this job, so hopefully actually this stuff's still good. I think I bought this stuff on Amazon. If so, it'll be in the link below. If not, there'll be a note saying either where I bought it or what you need to Google to find it. There are instructions with it. Read these because it talks about properly getting it started and checking that it's right so that you know what you're putting in there is all properly mixed. This has a working time of 10 minutes and then another 15 minutes till it's set up and another 15 minutes until it is ready to be top coated. So it can be top coated after 30 minutes is what it says, but I don't know quite how those numbers all work out. But anyway, what's important right now is that working time. You have 10 minutes for this to be flexible and pliable before you start causing problems trying to move it around. Per the instructions specifically, you can spread this stuff around with your finger, with a spatula, or with a the metal spatula, or with a spreader. When it talks about a spreader, it's talking about these things, type of things that get used for spreading filler. What I'm going to be doing is spreading it with a glove, just because I don't want that crap. I've got a bunch of cuts in my fingers, so I don't want that crap in the cuts. And what we're trying to do, if you remember from you, not that long ago, me, a week ago, the big important thing is at the bottom of the seam, there's that step down where the roof skin meets the side skin. You have to make sure that's covered, and then coming up the side over on this side, where it folds over, there's the lip there. Basically, technically, if both of those lips are covered, you've seam sealed it, because those are the seams. What we're going to try and do is fill this gutter much more full. Like on the original, there's a bit of a slant here, and then at the front, especially in the corners, there was a very heavy slant. We're going to try and make it a lot more even all the way around, and we're going to try and much more thoroughly fill this gutter with seam sealer. This will basically, the more full the gutter is, the less water sits in it. The less water sits in it, the less water has a chance to get past it and cause rust. I have a shorty van. I have 2 tubes of the seam sealer, which from reports should be enough. If you have a full size or an extended van, you're going to need you're going to need 3 extended might. Now, I don't think I'm going to need 4. I don't know. We'll see. According to reports, 2 is enough for a shorty, 3 for a regular van. Extended, I don't know. Nobody's mentioned anything about extended because they're so rare. But this stuff is not cheap. But if you're going through all of this and you don't want to have to do it again, spend the money. You definitely don't want to do this with the cheap seam sealer from an auto parts store that's just like a caulking tube. You absolutely, I cannot express enough, you do not want to do this with any kind of caulking. Household, like window and door caulk, it's not designed to go 70 miles an hour on a highway stuck to metal with all the vibration and everything that has. And do not use silicone. Even if you decide to cheap out and use the wrong, the other kind of seam sealer or whatever, do not use silicone under any circumstances. You never want to use a silicone product on steel. Silicone encourages rust on steel. It doesn't cause rust, but it encourages it because it's acidic. So if you put silicone up here and there's any cracks in the paint or the paint fails or whatever, it's going to make your van rust. So don't use a silicone thing. Even if you're not going to listen to me and use the wrong product, don't use that wrong product because you're just screwing yourself. Again, this stuff's not cheap, but if you're going to go through all this effort, really, how much is your time worth to do this all over again from scratch in a few years, or repair rust in your van because the cheap wrong product failed? I'm not getting any kickback from any of these manufacturers. Like I said, if you click on my Amazon link and you buy it, I get a kickback from Amazon. But the way those links work, if you click on it and you don't buy that from Amazon, but like if you click on my link and then you go buy underpants on Amazon, I get a kickback from those. It doesn't matter. There's some sort of weird window thing where I will get a kickback during that, basically that shopping trip on Amazon. So I'm not trying to sell you on a specific product. I don't get anything from these companies. This is just the good stuff. SEM is the good stuff. This is what body shops use. It's worth the money to do it right. So that being said, we're going to set up our gun here and we're going to get ready to go. Because I have that 10-minute window, I can't fart around because I got to get the entire roof done in 10 minutes because I have to be a little skimpy at the beginning to make sure I have enough to go all the way around. You'll know in a little bit how good the coverage is and therefore how careful you have to be, but I got to be a bit paranoid because I have no idea. Have a rag handy, it drools, holy crap. This cleans up with lacquer thinner. So get some of that, because you'll need it, holy cow. It's messy as hell. All right. Here, I put a lot in, and then I put less in as I went along, just suddenly got paranoid about amounts. But what I'm gonna do is run my finger through here and push it up into that upper seam. This is not the best way to do this. Actually, let me get one of those scrapers just for me. This is sort of where the self-leveling part comes in, is that I can push this up into here. It'll skin it up into there, and even though it drools down, it'll leave it connected to up there. Actually, this works really well. Putting it in there and pulling it. Hopefully I can show you this. Found a technique that helps get it in there. Of course, I'm trying to do this now under the roof thing, but basically I'm holding it like this when I apply it so that I'm pushing the bead up against the sidewall as I go. I can't do it perfectly now because the stupid garage door, and that just bubbled a bunch. Yeah, I'm using way too much, I think. I'm now paranoid I got to the end of that, but when that was working better, that was pushing it up against the side, and for most of it, it was sealing that upper seam. I still kind of went along the entire side and pushed it to just make sure, but it was like 80% all good, so I will take that. All right, 2 tubes is not enough for a shorty. Absolutely not. I have about 1/4 of a tube left, and most of this has a very skimpy amount in it. So I'm gonna go back around with the little bit I've got left and sort of look for any clearly inadequate spots. But in most cases, it's only that I pushed it up that means that upper seam is filled. The whole gutter is not full like it suggested it be. I'm going to see if a local Napa that's open today has more of this and pick up at least one more tube. I also need to clean up all the drips and everything because, dear God, I got it everywhere. Yeah, learn from my mistake. 2 tubes on a shorty, not enough. Yeah, I think 2 tubes of normal seam sealer, you know, the stuff that looks more like these, might have been enough, but not this stuff. All right, next, learn from my mistake. You're gonna want the rag with lacquer thinner ready. I suggest you do this job with 2 people. One person putting the seam sealer in, one person right behind him cleaning it up, because this here, you know, I got over around the corner there. This is already so cured it doesn't clean up with lacquer thinner, and if you really scrub at it, you take off your epoxy primer. So all those drips and everything all over the roof of it are all too cured to wipe up. They needed to be wiped up immediately. So I screwed that up royally. I have big globs all over everywhere because I just assumed I could go back in after and clean it up. Like, you know, you can see this mess here. The roof has got strips like this where it was still leaking out of the gun even though I released it. You know, when a van gets older, it sometimes dribbles. So that sucks. What I'm probably going to do is wait for that to cure and then come in with a razor blade and see what or sanding or something and see what I can do. But I'm probably now going to have to epoxy prime the roof, at least in that one spot where I scrubbed through it. Real unhappy with that. Really unhappy with how this went. The product itself is fine. I mean, to be very clear, SEM stuff is designed to be sold to body shops. It's designed to be sold to people who know what the fuck they're doing. That ain't me. So I'm guessing here on, I was guessing from what I read online that it would be enough. It wasn't. I assumed I would have a longer window to clean it up. I didn't. These are all my screw-ups. It's nothing to do with the product. But after all the work to get to this point, to have this go so badly, it's deeply frustrating. Before we go any further, let's talk about what happened yesterday with a day's hindsight. So I had no idea, like I've established, I'm not a car person. This is the first time I've interacted with this seam sealer, but I learned some very important lessons. One, the two tubes, not even close to enough. If we look at this, like up front here, it is lower than the outlet over here, so water will collect and stay. Down the side, it's actually worse. So, despite all the claims that you need about two tubes, I would say 3 to 4 minimum. Secondly, with all of the mess that I made, all down here, all up here, what I would strongly suggest that you do is where there's this step-up body line here, my thumb is in right now, I would run a tape all the way around at that point and mask off the roof at least part way up, just to avoid getting all this crap on your roof. Similarly, I would probably run a piece of tape along here and mask down to prevent all the drippage, because we have massive, like this mess right here, all down this window, that, and down over here and stuff. All of that could have been prevented with just some plastic sheeting. We'll get into me cleaning that up in a minute. However, there's going to be a slight deviation from the original thing here, because I was dumb and trusted, our current AI disaster Google search engine stuff, and I put in SEM self-leveling seam sealer in, and it said, hey, the local AutoZone, I think it was AutoZone, local AutoZone has it in stock, and it's more expensive than what you paid, but it's not crazy expensive. And then when I went on the site, it was like, oh, 20% off SEM seam sealer. Great. Bought it, showed up at the place, and now the picture just had the same style tube that I had before, except it just said seam sealer. Didn't even think about it for a second because I'd gotten there from a search for specifically self-leveling seam sealer. I get there, I pay for it, I pick it up. It is gray, or rather I ordered it online, go there to pick it up. It's gray medium-bodied seam sealer. This is not the same thing. This is SEM 39377. This is SEM 39387. Because AI is shit, it just took out self-leveling and was like, oh, SEM seam sealer. This is totally the same thing. And I didn't catch the difference. I could return this, but I'm going to try it with this because I hated this stuff so much that I'm actually going to try this. This is more like, it's going to have a consistency probably more like caulking. Like if you've ever used any sort of caulking out a gun, this is going to be something that's more or less going to keep its own shape and whatnot. Two reasons I'm using this. One, it's what I have and it's what's in stock. The other stuff's apparently available, but locally it's stupidly expensive. It's like twice what I can get it for elsewhere. And two, because of all the mess that I made, I ain't so fond of the self-leveling stuff anymore. So what we're going to try is using this and the spatula thingy to fill that in the way it's supposed to be with the self-leveling, but just doing it manually. Is this going to work? No idea. We're out in purely theoretical territory here. At this point, do not take my instruction as gospel, because you're going to find out alongside me whether this is a good idea at all or not. I do genuinely believe if you masked off the top and you use enough of the self-leveling stuff, it'd work the way it's supposed to be. But what I have right now is, see, this is just a little bit shy here, but this is inconsistent all the way down. Also, despite my attempts, I ended up with bubbles in it. And it's still, like, it has less in here now than the seam sealer I peeled out. Towards the front, it has more, but it didn't level out the final bit that I put in here. And it's, oh, wow, look at all the bubbles it ended up with. Those are not good. So what I'm going to attempt instead with the stuff that I ended up with, because I said I don't trust this stuff at all anymore, is I'm going to attempt to fill it with that seam sealer. That is also a dual mix. It's also going to cure, but I'm going to attempt it to fill with that stuff and flatten and level and see if that works better. I don't have to worry about it flowing around, but I also don't have to, but I'm also going to have to do a lot more of it on my own. 2 tubes of that, hopefully, will get me up where I need to be. I'm still, that's making me nervous in terms of product quantity as well, but because I have the basic stuff in there. The thing is, at the very least, the lower seam in there is sealed, and because I pulled it up along here, it looks like, with the exception of maybe the spots where there's a bubble, the seam sealer is up in there, so this is sealed. It's not great, it's not wonderful, I really don't like it. Alright, here is what I'm going to be using. Got the gun loaded, already run out. This stuff is already thicker, it's not drooling out of the end of the gun. It is coming out a little bit, but not like the other one was. This, though I'm going to change the blade out, I just realized. This is going to be for cutting into and cutting away the tops of any bubbles, so I can fill those with seam sealer so there's not voids. These are going to be for spreading the seam sealer around, and then I have my lacquer thinner and some rags for cleanup as need be. I'm probably going to be using my finger a lot to smooth this as well. That's part of the thing with the lacquer thinner, is I can clean my glove off. Hopefully this will go well. That's actually all I have to say. Hopefully this will go well. I did the first section. It's less pretty than the self-leveling stuff, but I have felt like I had way more control over it to make sure it got where I needed it to go. And I'm still not like super full, but it's more full than before. You can kind of see the step up there. Because this stuff will basically stay in place, unlike the other stuff, that's why you need to use it for something like this, is I'm just going to fill this up, and that big glob at the end, yeah, I pushed that big glob this way, and then went around and pushed it back in this way, and now what I'm going to do with my finger is just try to sort of make that transition there between the two panels a little bit nicer. Alright, I'm learning a couple things, I'm going to pass them on to you. As I'm working my way along here, I'm going to actually clean up while I'm talking to you. I'm doing this as I go along because we learned that lesson the hard way. And yeah, it actually works pretty decently. Lacquer thinner on a rag, just white. The only thing you gotta really do is make sure you're careful about not dipping your rag where it shouldn't be, and about keeping an eye that you don't have so much on here that you're now just making a new mess when you push it along. But finger works way better than the spreader by a long shot. You know, part of it's you're in a gutter here. I think the only reason the spreader would work is if you had it completely flat. And I may end up at that point, but I'm not there yet. But what I've learned is because this is constantly setting up, do your bead along. Oh, the shit stinks. Do your bead along for a section, but start at the far end and work your way back when you're smoothing. Because over here I was having a problem where it's trying to start on top of, even with some on my finger, trying to start on top of what was there and push. It kept leaving a gap because some of it, you know, what was on my finger was moving, not the stuff below, and it wasn't enough to keep those filled. So I think if you start it the other way and push into it, you'll fill those little gaps at the end nicer. And all I was literally doing was taking my finger, putting it in there with the tip of my finger pointing a little bit forward and pushing, because that encourages it to go this way towards the lip. Not if you go flat or you go this way, you'll encourage it to push towards the roof, which is not where you need it. So if you just kind of go like this, and you'll just kind of get the idea, just push it along, and it ends up pretty darn smooth, especially like, again, like I keep saying, there's not a roof, so how many people are going to see it, but especially how many people are going to see the gutter. So don't obsess about making it perfect, but by that metric, you also don't want to make a hole where water can just sit, and you don't want to make a dam anywhere that keeps water from moving towards the drain holes. So just keep that stuff in mind. I will say, having worked with this and with the self-leveling, I actually, so far, and we'll get to this at the end for sure, but so far I think I would prefer to work with this stuff, the regular seam sealer. What I would probably do is cut the opening fairly large, put a nice big bead biased towards the side where there's those two gaps, and then just come in and level it out. And then you can always come back if you need to and add more to get it the height you want. You can also just, hey, I don't quite have as much here as I thought I did, and just kind of do something like this, add a little bit more. Oops, well, the biggest thing you want to make sure you're doing the whole time is not leaving voids. This isn't bubbling the way that I was getting bubbles with the other stuff, so that seems to also be a plus, though that may be a chemical reaction thing that happens later. That's possible, I can't be sure. But hopefully you'll see, and that's a weird angle, but see that void right there? That's a place for water to sit. So what I'm just going to do, take a glob of it on my finger, start a little bit ahead of it, and just push across it to fill that void. And really the hardest part about doing all of this is trying to keep a consistent height. And I'm not doing a great job of that, but I'm doing okay. And you can always come back and add more if you feel the strong need to in an area. You're better off with too much than too little, unless it's actually like gushing over the sides, you know, and leaving drools down the side of the van. You really can't go wrong over seam sealing, especially with this stuff, because it's self-catalyzing. You know, once it's mixed, it's going to cure itself. It's not air cured, so you don't have to worry about it being too thick and not curing properly. I'm sure at some point there's a thickness where curing becomes a problem, but I don't think you're going to run into it on this. So now as soon as I do a section, I'm being smart, going through, wiping it all down, constantly switching my rag around. Alrighty, I am done. And I've cleaned up as went along, so I didn't leave a mess. Let's sit down. All right, let's talk about it. That was, I think it might have been more work than the self-leveling, but I felt like I had much better control than the self-leveling, and it was way less messy than the self-leveling because it only pretty much stayed. There were a couple times where the end of the nozzle dripped as I was moving it, but it was way less than before. It wasn't doing those big, like, drooly runs like it was before. So, in my opinion, you are way better off just getting the standard SEM seam sealer. 35377, not the self-leveling 35387. It's also a little bit cheaper. Not a lot, but a little bit. I feel like it's way more controllable. If you want a finer finish, what I would do is do all but one tube or half the tubes of this stuff, and I use this stuff to put the base amount in there and make sure you get everything sealed, and then maybe put the self-leveling on top of it because that'll help smooth the surface out some. But that's only if you're really doing like a show van, you know, and if you're doing a show van, why the hell are you watching my channel? But this, I felt like I had way more control. I had maybe more ability to make sure it got where it was and it wasn't going to move, because that's the thing I didn't even think about, the self-leveling. In theory, it's great if you have enough of it to fill that channel, but if you don't, it's going to move away from areas. Where this is going to stay where you put it. So, yeah. What I would do, having learned what I've learned, is I would use the regular stuff. And what I would do is I would go in and do a first pass all the way around the van that is just putting it into the outer groove, you know, this way. Put a bead in all the way around and use my finger to smear that so that it's down in where the roof skin meets the wall, and it's up where the piece folds over the top. You know, just get a like triangle basically in the corner all the way around, sealing that all the way up, and do your joints where the panels meet, so that at that point you know you've sealed everything that needs to be sealed. So anything else you put on after that is just to reinforce that and make sure that you know, keep a lot of water away from that. But that coat will have done all of your sealing. You'll know it's all done because you've just done a narrow amount all the way around, making sure you get it in there so you know there's no gaps. And then I would go back in, and from there, and then you can do this right away, like go around the whole van with that, and then immediately, starting from where you ended, go in and fill, and at that point maybe use, like, if you have like 4 tubes, I used 4 tubes on this. I think realistically I needed 4 tubes. This is 207 milliliters. I don't know what the other, but the other, this is the quantity in each of those tubes. But after that you can go through and you can either just fill it all the way to the top, you know, all the way high up, or you can work your way around filling it more and more, you know, do like half a tube on each side. And then come back in later with another tube and make sure you got it all where you want it. I feel like, even though it's the same amount of material, I functionally got more out of the thicker stuff also because I could put it exactly where it needed to be. It felt less wasteful. So that's my opinion. Don't take it as gospel, because the self-leveling stuff is something I just heard a lot of other people saying, but in my personal opinion, the regular 2-part, you want a 2-part because you want it to cure on its own. You don't want it to depend on air curing or anything, or solvent curing or whatever, because this way you know it's cured all the way down through. And if I put my fingers up against here, this whole channel's a bit warm now, just slightly, and that's that it's curing. It's, you know, it's solventing itself. I don't think I'd try and fill it all at once. I think you're better off, like I said, do the one coat around so you know everything's sealed, so you know you haven't left an air bubble or something that's a failure point. And then work your way around. And you don't have to like build up, but I wouldn't try and do it all in one go. All right. So the next step after I did all my seam sealer, I went through and cleaned up everything. And then since I'm painting the whole roof, I painted the whole roof, but you just want to paint everything so that the seam sealer is covered, because then it'll be fine, because you don't have to worry about the UV stability. You need to get enough paint on there to completely cover the seam sealer. So that, because so if you can still see like a color differential between the body and the seam sealer, that's not enough paint. You got to put another coat on it. But that's it. Once you've got your paint on, you're done. It is now sealed. It's now stabilized. You don't have to worry about that for a good long time, because that's a better seam sealer than what was made at the factory, just because technology has improved over the years. That's going to be it. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.